This is a Giant Faith. For anybody new here, my name is Graham. The shop I'm in is Bike Bros, and what I do here is I have a look at bikes. I tell you about all the details, so by the end you have a really good understanding about a new bike. In today's video, we're looking at the Giant Faith, and there is a great story here about why I think this is the best kids full suspension bike on the market, and also why that feature gives us a really good hint about what Giant might be up to in the future and how that might make more affordable full suspension bikes much better. So stick with me. Today we're looking at this Giant Faith. So as mentioned, my name is Graham, the shop is Bike Bros, and what we're trying to do here on this channel is to provide you with some really good information about bikes so that you understand bikes and the bike industry even better. If that sort of thing interests you, please consider subscribing and leave a comment down below, because I want to know what kind of information that a bike shop owner could be offering you about either the bikes, the industry, tech, any of that sort of stuff. So please let me know. As you can see, we've got a fair number of subscribers for this channel already, but I think there's a lot of room for a bike shop owner to be telling people the things that they really want to know from an insider's perspective. So as we get going, I am going to be giving you all the specifications about this bike. I'll tell you the weight, price, all that sort of stuff, what makes this bike so damn special. And then by the end, I'm going to give you that hint about why I think this bike is hinting about Giant's intentions to improve on full suspension value bikes in a pretty meaningful way. So the specs, and excuse my little cheat sheet that I've got here, but there's a lot of numbers that I want to look at and I want to make sure I get them right. To start with, the price on this bike, $31.99 Canadian. So we're not talking about bargain bikes here. This is a proper kid-sized version of a full-on full suspension bike. Size-wise, this is going to be designed around a 4'6" to 5'2" rider, so that's going to be an important part to consider. And a big deal is the fact that this bike's suspension is optimized around somebody 57 to 132 pounds. So that's going to be one of the big discussion points that we have on this bike. Rear suspension on this bike, 135 millimeters. Front suspension, 140 millimeters. And that does get into a little bit of the confusion I had about this bike a year ago when it was released. Because of the Giant name, the fact that they called this a Faith, I thought the Giant was going after a kid's freeride bike. I think with both the weight and the amount of suspension that this bike has, we're looking much more at the equivalent of a modern day full-on trail to all mountain bike. So this means your kid can come for the 10-kilometer sort of loop on the local XC trails with you, have a great time, or if you go to the bike park, equally good. So this is your do-it-all sort of a kid's mountain bike. For the people who think that price is crazy, $3,200 for a kid's bike, well, we happen to see a lot of parents who are heavily into cycling, and to them it is extremely important that their kids are presented with the best first impression to mountain biking so that they can have a hope of actually having mountain biking as a family activity for many years to come. Brake rotors, we're looking at hydraulic discs, 180 front rotor, 160 rear. We have 1x10 drivetrain on here, and I'm going to go over those details in a bit. 77-degree seat tube angle, 64.5-degree head tube angle. So we're looking at all the modern numbers that you would expect out of a trail bike. And I don't know if I mentioned 30 pounds is the weight. And if that seems heavy, which it quite honestly does to me when you say the number, one of the things that impressed me with this bike upon seeing it in flesh for the first time a couple months ago was lifting it. It is in the neighborhood of probably 5 to 6 pounds lighter than what we see from most of the other mainstream manufacturers when they're talking about a kid's bike. So yes, it could be lighter, but to give us meaningfully useful suspension, all the things on this bike, proper tires, all that sort of stuff, I think that 30-pound weight is actually very respectable. And upon doing a bit of research into it, you even look at bikes that are quite a bit more expensive with less travel. That 30-pound number is a hard one to get under on any of these bikes. So I think that they've done a pretty impressive job of making more of an all-mountain sort of a bike, still in that weight range. Now, the one criticism I'll have about this bike and about the numbers, the cranks on here. So I'll tell you about that in a minute. So next I'm going to go over all of the detailed specifications on the bike. But like I said, by the end, I think you'll see why this bike is both important and then where Giant put a whole bunch of money that could give us great hints about what they're up to in the future and what that's going to mean to value-oriented full suspension bike buyers. So the details. This is actually one of two different faiths in Giant's lineup. This one, 26-inch rear wheel, 27.5 front wheel, is the larger of the two, and then they also do a 24-inch wheeled version, which is in a real nice sort of chrome brushed aluminum kind of a look. On this bike, as I mentioned, 135 mils of rear travel. We are looking at single pivot and linkage driven. So that is done in this case because they're trying to keep the price low-ish. They're also trying to keep the complexity of the rear suspension minimal because that helps with weight. And we are seeing that even with things like the new Anthem release, this whole flex pivot thing, so the fact that this is all one piece and relying on a tiny amount of flex between the seat stay and the chain stay being the way that they're able to do a linkage driven single pivot, that seems to be a really efficient, lightweight, and a little bit cost savings way of doing good rear suspension. The rear end on this bike is 148mm boost. We're looking at a UDH rear derailleur hanger of importance because if you wreck a hanger anywhere in the world, this universal derailleur hanger is going to make your life really easy. It also meant that if you ever wanted to put SRAM transmission on this bike, you could. I don't think that would be practical because part of the reason that we have the drivetrain that we do on this bike is to try and keep this sort of bottom of the derailleur cage a reasonable distance from the ground. And that, I think, is why Giant chose this Microshift Advent X drivetrain. So we're still looking at a clutched rear derailleur, 1x10, just shorter cages and optimized around this 11 to 48 tooth cassette. Now of note, this cassette has aluminum spidering on the inside. So this is, I think they quite purposely chose a higher quality cassette in this case to keep the weight down, especially on this part that is moving with the suspension. As we look at the wheels, we have these Giant TRA wheels on here. They're a 30mm internal, 40mm external rim, and that extra 10mm of width comes from the fact that they basically have a wide shelf on either side that is helping to protect the tire from slicing if we compress it all the way down, hitting a rock or anything like that. Tubeless valve, this is set up tubeless. Giant gives us the tubeless sealant when they ship us this bike. Also, related to that wheel, the hub that they use on here, this is a Giant hub, but it's a 72 points of engagement, so a pretty high engagement hub. And I've actually used the same hub on my own bike for the last 3 years, and it has been bomb-proof. So, good quality hub, good quality wheels, Maxxis tires, the DHR, DHF combo between the two, set up tubeless. So we're looking at all good quality stuff here. We have impressive chainstay protection on the back of the seat stay. We also have some rubber here. So in addition to the clutch that we have in the rear derailleur, that's going to help to sort of calm the chain's movement, we also have some really good rubber protection. As mentioned, single pivot. And the one thing you'll see here is that pivot placement is somewhat high in relation to the chainring size. That to me says that this is going to be a somewhat high anti-squat number for all those people who like to study kinematics charts. And that, I think, is a very smart option because high anti-squat and a lightweight rider is going to probably give us something that's going to be pedaling quite efficiently while still allowing the rear wheel to move when it's actually hitting obstacles. Now, as I mentioned before, these cranks, they're Charm, so basically that is a no-name brand, but they're 155mm length. So I think of all the things that this bike absolutely nailed in specifications, these cranks are too long. They should probably be somewhere in the 135, 145 sort of length, especially given that we now see 165s being offered on full adult-sized bikes. We do get some nice features like the chain watcher and the little bit of a chain bash guard, sort of a protector down here. So that's some really nice details. The pedals, this bike actually comes with pedals, which is nice to see. These are a full composite, not a steel pin, but quite a sharp plastic pins, so I think practically grippy without giving us kids with sliced up bloody shins. And then it does also have chromoly spindles and sealed bearings. So we are looking at a high quality pedal, appropriately sized. So that is going to be something that you don't have to upgrade, which is so darn common on so many bikes these days. As we move up here, once again, 77-degree seat tube angle. A really pleasant thing that they have done on here is put the thought into the fact that this is a 70 to 100 millimeter adjustable dropper, but it is also kid specific. So when you push down on this thing to depress your seat post, it takes very, very little weight. So you're not going to have your 75-pound kid jumping up and down just to get a seat post to go down, or themselves being flung up into the air when the seat post goes up. So that pressure, nice and light. The pressure at the remote, also pretty light there too. So some well thought out stuff. We have good internal cable routing. It's done in a pretty clean way. We also have bottle cage. So I think we have all the things that we would expect to see on here. I wouldn't be surprised if to use this bottle cage mount, you would have to use one of Giant's ARX bottles and cages, which is their child sort of sized bottle cage combo that just helps to sort of fit a bottle into a more compressed zone like this. Looking ahead, that's a tapered steer tube, tapered head tube with a tapered steer tube inside, aluminum steer tube, aluminum stanchions on this fork, and then that is going to lead us into talking about the suspension, and this is where this bike shines. So this goes back to then comparing to a lot of the other bikes that we see out there. Now, most brands, when they're doing a kids bike, their options are they go to RockShox, they go to Fox, they go to X-Fusion, one of those companies, and they say, give me the lightest tune on your rear shock and on your fork. In a couple cases, we'll see companies that even go out of their way to do a better quality fork by putting a Manitou on there. Manitou is the only brand that is doing child-specific sort of suspension, but I have not seen anything with Manitou rear, Manitou fork. So this is a huge standout. So what Giant did, well, we'll reverse a little bit. So the problem you have when you're going to be using off-the-shelf, even light-tuned suspension is all that stuff is going to be optimized around riders, probably in the 130 to 175 pound weight range. So what happens when you have a sub 100-pound rider and you're trying to get a shock or a fork to work properly, you lower the air pressure, and what happens is the internal hydraulic valving in here, that's both compression and rebound, is just way too heavy, and so you end up with a lot of stiction to start into the stroke, and you almost get a reverse sort of a feel. Instead of having progressive suspension, you have regressive. Very hard to get into travel, and then you kind of blast through the travel, and then you're left with the last little bit. So you kind of end up with the suspension being treated as something that is useful, but only in big hits, and you can't really get the air pressure down to the pressure you want for optimal performance. So the myth on this bike goes, somebody at Giant with kids of their own and who was a hardcore mountain biker basically asked, if we're doing this kids bike, can I design suspension specifically for this kids bike? And so they came up with this FlowTrack Lite, so a shock particularly designed around lightweight riders. It's a two-position shock, so we do have a trail or a sort of a soft lockout and a ride mode. We've got rebound, we've got all the key things. It's trunnion mount. We've got a high quality shock, but optimized purely for that lightweight rider. At the same time they were doing that, Giant has been messing around with their own forks for quite a while now, largely at the entry level, but this thing here is so incredibly supple that I think that this is where we start to see hints that Giant is going to start doing some amazing things with suspension that's going to help future value priced bikes to have really, really supple lightweight suspension. So this thing here, the Crest 34 SL, this is a 34 mil stanchion bike, 140 millimeters of travel. Of course, it's an air shock again. We have a sweep style compression adjustment on there. Quite subtle adjustment all the way around. It never gets to lockout, but it does get to feeling quite firm relative to the super light action of the fork. Down below here, we have rebound adjustment. So between our fork and our shock, we are looking at all of the adjustments you could possibly ask for on suspension. And then the fact, once again, just chirping on about this idea, the fact that this is designed with a kid's weight in mind is just mind-blowing. And that is why this is the best kids full suspension on the market. And it is very, very rare that I will say best. I'll usually say my favorite, whatever. This is the best on the market right now until somebody figures out similar technology. But this is where we see Giant and their massive size being able to actually make sense of engineering these parts pretty much from scratch. So, as mentioned before, we're looking at that suspension being optimized for riders in the 57 to 132 pound range. So I'll take a step back now and I'll talk about the fact this bike was released a year ago. I saw a bunch of the marketing to do with this bike. I saw the name, I was confused. I thought this was a free ride bike. And it was only 2 months ago when I saw this bike for the first time in person at a Giant event and actually compressed the suspension and felt how amazing it was that I truly understood, wow, Giant has done something quite amazing on this bike. So, in the future, better suspension on value bikes. For now, the best suspension on a kid's bike. Carrying on with all the details on this bike. We have some really, really nice, these are Tektro, they're 2-piston brakes, but these are a junior specific brake. And that comes down to, it feels like it's lighter action to actually squeeze these levers, a little bit of a different shape to them. And then it just feels like there's a fair amount of power considering everything involved. So not sure what the magic was there, but very impressed by the feel on these brakes at 2-piston. And having seen a couple tests on these brakes, people seem generally impressed that they're assuming that they're going to be wanting 4-piston brakes, and then after using them, they think, you know what, Tektro actually did something pretty special. Another thing I'm impressed with, once again, going along with that rear derailleur I talked about, the Microshift X, and I will say I am in general a big fan of Microshift and the pressure that they have put on the entire industry to just make better one-by drivetrains no matter the price. This is a particularly good one for the kids because these two buttons are pretty darn close to each other and pretty easy to depress, even though we've got that clutch on the rear derailleur. So going back to the details, in-house handlebars from Giant, an appropriately short stem. What I do like on here is we have super, super narrow grips, but these guys haven't gone as far as putting an extra narrow handlebar on, which would take us outside the zone of just an off-the-shelf handlebar. So if, for whatever reason, your kid wanted to put on a higher rise handlebar, or a carbon bar, something different, they're not going to be, in that case, they would have been forced into sort of changing out some of the controls. In this case, everything transfers over. Somehow Giant just figured out how to make an extremely small diameter grip that still feels pretty reasonable. So going around, we have a look now, those Tektro brakes, that 180 brake rotor. We are looking at a press fit bottom bracket, I guess, in addition to these charm cranks that I think are too long. The fact that this is press fit, a little bit of a bummer. I would always love to see instead a threaded external bearing bottom bracket on any bike. All that said, I would say the system that Giant uses for their press fit has proven to be way, way, way less issue than so many of the early release press fits that caused creaking, premature wear, all those sorts of things. So while it's a little bit of a nuisance, in practicality, what we've seen is pretty good longevity out of these things, so nothing to be concerned about. As I said, pinch bolt cranks, 155, should be 135 or 145. Just so the details on the back here. Once again, no pivot to be seen back here because we're counting on that flex point suspension design. One other thing, things that are too big on this bike. As I mentioned, the cranks. The one other thing that I would say, this saddle, the Giant Romero saddle, I'm personally a fan of this bike, or of this saddle. I sort of lump it in as one that I like almost as much as the WTB Volt, but that's under my 6'1" adult bum. I think that this thing is just too long and especially considering the trendy nature these days of the stubby saddles, this would be a perfect culprit here for putting a much smaller saddle on and maybe doing something that they concentrated on really light rails so that the saddle could be one of the places where they saved some weight. Other weight savings areas, I can't point out anything in particular. If you had a kid that was maybe going to be really trail riding, you could potentially hunt down some slightly lighter tires. Once again, the fact that these are Minion DHR, DHF on this bike, 2.4, 2.5. Maybe if there is such a thing as a 26 and 27.5 version of something like an Icon or whatever, you could save some weight there. But otherwise, I think that Giant has done a pretty tremendous job of just making a damn good bike that your kid is just going to be so impressed with. And like I said, they gave us a hint. That shock, that fork, I think we're going to be starting to see some things that maybe bring top level performance or close to top level performance as far as suspension components onto bikes at more attractive prices. And anytime I see a bike company doing that, I get excited. So this is the Giant Faith, the 26-27.5 version. This is a hint that Giant is going to potentially make more affordable full suspension bikes way better. My name is Graham. This is Bike Bros. If you like this sort of content, please consider liking, subscribing. Tell me more if there's things that you wanted me to talk about, even other topics. I love seeing the comments. If you look at a lot of our videos, you'll see I respond to a pile of comments. I spend a lot of time doing that. I truly enjoy it. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Today, we're talking about the Giant Faith. Today, we're talking about the Giant Faith.